Hello, and welcome to the Human Betterment Zone. And joining us in the zone today, Jordan Rubin. I always want to say Dr. Jordan Rubin. Why is that? Is it because you're so smart? I think of you as a doctor? Or why do I think that? Why do I associate?
I do have degrees in naturopathic medicine and nutrition, but years ago, Phil, unlike today, people were not too kind to quote unquote alternative medical degrees, and I got so much crap when I
Yeah.
wrote my first book, and I just decided, you know what, I will minimize the credential part and just be me. So there you have it. To the
What's
disappointment of Jewish mothers everywhere, where you can't be called doctor. So
what
there,
was the
there you have it.
Maker's Diet the first book? Was that the first?
That was my third book, but it was the first one anyone remembers. Just like we talked about off the air, that was my Facebook, whereas the first two were more like MySpace and classmates. But no, I wrote two books prior, but that one was the one that seemed to catch the most traction, lightning in a bottle, whatever you want to call it. So all the euphemisms.
So what was the first one?
Uh, Patient Heal Thyself was my first book,
Oh,
which
okay.
which was very successful in that we gave 1 million copies away, and then I wrote Restoring Your Digestive Health, and Maker's Diet was third.
Okay. So, if I were introducing you, I wouldn't know how. It's funny. I remember years ago, I had a company that would book me on shows, and the interviewer, would read whatever they sent. So they would send crazy. They go, "Here he is, the man who trained Cindy Crawford and Demi Moore." And then I'd come on. I go, "No, no, it's not really true." So, I know so many things about you, and I've known you for so long that my inclination is just to say the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Maker's Diet. But you've done so much since then that's almost like trivial. It's kind of like a tiny piece of the Jordan pizza.
Well, I have a new book coming out in August, Phil, and I had to put a bio together, so I guess I'm a little bit fresh from that. But I like to say uh, I'm a founder, farmer, and formulator. That's what my title is with my current company. So that's a good one. I mean, I am somebody who also would call myself a missionpreneur. Like I know entrepreneurialism is looked upon with a much more favorable light with Shark Tank, et cetera. But I never really liked the idea of this serial entrepreneur where I'm always starting things and selling things. I feel like when I see a problem and I find an answer to that problem, I really want to make sure to get that to the world. And that's how I really started. I was deathly ill, and I knew whatever helped me, I would share with others. And so that's continued to drive me. And Phil, as we were joking off the air, you and I are both becoming more mature, and now we're we're in the category of, I guess, sages. I meet people that say, Jordan, I became a chiropractor because of your influence, or my mom or my grandmother loves your books. And so I think as we go on, we're dealing with more challenges personally, professionally, health wise, with our family, and it causes us to find answers. And then when you have a platform, you feel compelled to share them. And so that's sort of what I like to do. But I really am uh, passionate about regenerative agriculture, passionate about regenerating health. And another way that I would say it, Phil, my mission statement is to heal the planet, feed the world, and eradicate disease. So
Okay.
I try to think big.
And in pursuing that mission, whether you like it or not, you are a serial entrepreneur because you get insights, you get ideas, and you follow that. Let's play a quick game. I think you'll like this game, and I think you'll be good at it. It's called the opposite. I'll say a word, you say the opposite, okay? Gets a little tricky.
Sure.
Let's start with this. Dog.
Cat, but it's
Okay.
not really the opposite. But I just
Okay. But for the sake of the game, uh, boy.
girl.
Right. And not everybody would agree with that right now, but that's the way we're going with it.
It's
Um,
getting better though, Phil. It's getting
yeah.
better, I think.
Palm Beach Gardens. I'll give you the
Um,
answer to this one. If you're not sure, I'll give you the answer. Missouri. It's the
my wife,
opposite. I'm
my,
going to tell
my
you why.
wife would say that for
Yeah, I'm going to
sure,
tell you
Phil.
why. Because in Palm Beach Gardens, which you're familiar with, you can throw a stone and you're guaranteed to hit either a Macy's, a Nordstrom's, or a Bloomingdale's, right? In Missouri, you can throw a stone and nobody knows where it lands. Maybe it landed in some cow dung. And if you want to hit a store, you got to throw it at least 35 miles and you might hit a Kmart parking lot, right? Now, why would I point out these two extremes? Because in looking at the guy sitting here with me, you were a guy who lived a very comfortable life in Palm Beach Gardens, right?
Yes.
And then one day you had to tell your wife, who was living a very comfortable life in Palm Beach Gardens, hey, honey, we're moving to the opposite. How did that conversation go? How did you explain that to her?
You know, it's funny. I remember now, Phil, sharing Nikki and I sharing this story with you, I think in our home, which I'll share a little bit again. But look, people who have listened to you, depending on how deep you've gone, wouldn't be surprised with spiritual or unique circumstances. And so when I tell you that God spoke to me in the midst of a church service where music was going on and the words, you're leaving, were all that I got. But it was in the context of I had been on a pretty long travel trip doing seminars and etc. And I came back and I was thinking to myself, wow, I really love it here. This is literally what I was thinking in my mind. I love it here. This is amazing. This is where I want to be. And then God said, you're leaving. And for me, I'm not an overly emotional person from a crying perspective. So picture this in context. I was holding my BlackBerry, which I was a huge BlackBerry fan. I'm pretty disappointed that the BlackBerry movie did not include me because I'm sure that I was their top 10 customer. So I started to cry, like practically weep. And so I typed this to Nikki and I said, I held the phone up and it said, you know, God told me we're leaving. And she kind of knew pretty much exactly what that meant. And the way she tells the story, if she had a chance to think about it, she would have cried as well, but for different reasons. So, Phil, I was living a great life, to your point, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. I remember Nikki saying, I want to live here forever. She came from Eastern Kentucky and had lived in Florida for probably 10 years at that time. I lived there for 35 years. And it's great in so many ways. And so many people want to be there. And in the last 5 years, more people have moved there than almost any place in America. But I felt called to do more than just live a comfortable life. It's fine to benefit from your success. It's fine to have the big house and your kids go to the best schools and have the best weather. But I felt like God wanted me to go start doing more and really being aligned with a mission that he called us to, which is, as I mentioned, to help heal the planet, feed the world, eradicate disease. And then for my wife and I, we also have a passion for adoption, for taking in children that are, for lack of a better term, orphaned, although it isn't always kids that don't have parents, it's kids that don't have parents that actually care for them. And so we felt like that leap of faith to go to Missouri in the middle of everywhere, I'm putting a positive spin on it, was a way for us to not just have faith, but have action or works. And the Bible is pretty clear about two things. Faith without works is dead. And true religion is caring for widows and orphans and keeping yourself undefiled from the world. And now, if you look at those three areas, Phil, that's a pretty hard set of qualifications, right? So if you are caring for widows and orphans and keeping yourself undefiled from the world, you are one of very few. But I can totally see why that's the heart of God, because you're caring for people that can't care for themselves and trying to make sure that you don't get caught up in everything of the world. So for us to go to Missouri, that was what we were doing. We were leaving this amazing, I'll say it just because, again, it's good contextually, 7,700 square foot house in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and with this amazing pool and yada, yada, yada. And we first lived in a 500 and then later 900 square foot cabin on our ranch that was built in the 70s. And it was an amazing kind of year and a half. We thought we'd be there forever. But we think God gave us a little escape route to go other places. Now I still own the land and we farm and we manufacture and it's great, but living there was not something we were thrilled about. We were willing to do it. And sometimes when you're willing to do something, God gives you an escape route. And the best example of that, Phil, is Abraham and Isaac. Like God said to Abraham, and we don't have the full context because it's just a short paragraph. God said to Abraham, go more or less sacrifice your son, your only son. And from the accounts of the Bible, Abraham did it. And right when he was about to sacrifice his son, God said, wait.
Just kidding.
For now I know that you truly love me above all. And then there was a ram in the thicket that God provided as an escape. And so, I use these examples. When we moved to Missouri, Abraham, who's the father of the three major religions in the world, was told to go to a land he did not know. And without questioning God, he did. So, those are two amazing things that Abraham did. But
Abraham also, this is the most amazing sales job I think I've ever heard of, had to convince all the men of his household to cut off their foreskins. Like, that's something big. That's probably harder than telling Nikki we're living in the city. All right,
so it's a fair point. As adults, without any type of anesthetic, that's a tough few days of recovery. And Phil, might I add, with Flintstones, not like the Flintstones, but like stones of flint.
Stones made of flint.
Wasn't like they had a scalpel like the Moyles do today.
All right, so let's back up for people who are meeting you for the first time. I know I have a lot of people who know you and they're anxious to hear from you, but let's give a little more context. So you said that your life was in jeopardy somehow. You were going through a difficult experience. I know that. You were how old, 18, 19?
Yeah, right around there when I was diagnosed with Crohn's colitis, traveled the world trying to get well. Conventional medicine failed. And my dad was an alternative medicine expert, naturopathic doctor, chiropractor. So he was able to send me to the far reaches of the earth to try to get well. And none of that worked until I found a man who taught me how to eat like the Bible. And somewhat ironically, growing up in a Jewish family, and you heard me mention church, so I'm what you'd call a Messianic Jew. So think of every single straight path, and I always find a way to veer to the right or the left and take a different course. But growing up in a Jewish family, it's interesting that I was 19 years old and had to learn about eating the biblical way from a eccentric nutritionist who wasn't Jewish in San Diego. But that, along with a powerful probiotic from the soil, really caused me to overcome a disease that medicine calls as incurable. And I took that message, and that's how I started Garden of Life, my first company. And
wait, but Crohn's
sharing
disease
with people
was literally killing you, right? You were wasting
Yes, I was
away
104 pounds. Yes, and if you want to look, I have some before pictures online. Go to Google Images, type in my name.
We'll put
There's another Jordan Rubin you might find who writes science fiction movies. My kids call him the bad Jordan Rubin, and his kids probably call me the weird Jordan Rubin.
The bizarro Jordan Rubin.
Exactly. Yeah. So I got well and started sharing the message, first working at a health food store back in Palm Beach Gardens.
And wait, I want to go back. I want to stay with it because
okay.
You were going to die. Like, you had those thoughts, right?
And I wanted to.
And your parents had those thoughts. Like, we're losing our son. And this was sort of like a last resort. And when you said eccentric, a lot of people thought this was crazy. Like, he's going to learn from this whacked out nutritionist. And really the message, very simply put, God made it, eat it, man made it, don't, right? It was a little more than that. But that was the message. So you made a deal with Jesus, with God, with divinity. Can you talk about that?
Well, when I was sick, and think of this as a 19-year-old, and I was one of those invincible 19-year-olds thinking, health doesn't matter all that much. I'm just like everybody else. I am the life of the party. I have a mission. I'm in college. I'm working my plan, so to speak. And so for me to get sick, it took a while for me to really come to grips that this wasn't like a cold or a flu, that it was going to go away. It wasn't going to go away in a week or two. And so when I became the sick guy, or another way to put it, I'm a person on everyone's prayer request list,
Your identity changed.
Yes. And pray for Jordan because he's dying. Yeah. And not to mention, I had an embarrassing disease, a bowel disease. I was emaciated. I didn't want people to visit me. I was in a wheelchair when I traveled most of the time, which was only to doctors. But I remember when the disease, quote unquote, settled in, that I thought there's nothing more important on earth than your health. Now, your relationships, I think, are more important, but something that you can own or possess. And I remember thinking and praying, God, if you heal me, I'm going to spend the rest of my life helping, even if it's just one person, overcome disease, or better yet, avoid it. And I think, that was one of the seeds that were planted for my future, in addition to asking my mom to take my before picture when I actually looked and felt like I was dying. I
Yeah.
often wonder, Phil, if I didn't do that, what opportunity would I have missed? And this wasn't in a day of sort of digital photos. Like, I literally had a negative. I love trying to tell kids today about, I had this negative and it was my most prized possession. But that photograph that my mom took, I really believe was the catalyst for me to begin to develop nutritional products and start a company and write books, because that testimonial was something so powerful for people that were suffering, and not just Crohn's disease, but MS or cancer, et cetera. So even though I was 22 years old, I had this credibility because I had been through the ringer and come out the other end. And I used to sit in doctors' offices and look at all of their diplomas and credentials on the wall. And they would always tell me, oh, you're going to be on this medication and you'll need this surgery and you won't be able to have kids unless you go on this medication and off that other one. And I always thought to myself, I don't want to talk to an expert. I want to talk to a survivor or a conqueror. Like, I want to talk to somebody who's been through it and been healed. And I
A
think
real expert. That's who the real expert is.
and that's what, if you look at social media today, fast forward, those are the people that have the following. They're not all highly credentialed, but they have been there, done that. And
They walked through the fire and they came out the other side. Yeah.
Yep. So that's sort of the start of my story. Now, not to get too off track, but years later, approximately 11 years later, well, it was more like 15 years later from my Crohn's disease diagnosis, I was diagnosed with incurable or terminal cancer. And
Well, I'm reeling you back in.
Well.
I'm backing you up a little bit. We're going to get
I'm just saying, we've been through a few things here.
Yeah. So you're a multiple expert. You're expert many times over.
Yes.
You've walked through many
I
fires.
don't want any more expertise. I'm going to. I know that's a silly thing to say, but I'm kind of feeling like that.
Yeah, you're smart enough. Now you have to share more and more. Crohn's disease was not as common then. Now, is it because it was not as common then, or because it's overly diagnosed today, or because nutrition got worse and lifestyle got worse? Because now you hear about it all the time. Somebody who knows.
Phil, it's nuts. Now, growing up, I knew two people that were diagnosed with Crohn's disease, but when you're a kid, you're not compassionate, you're not sympathetic. I didn't know much about what it was. Both kids that I knew were very small. It was pre-puberty and they didn't grow to normal size, but they didn't talk about all their bowel issues. I didn't know much about it. Fast forward to today, I don't watch television, but I watch video clips and sports, etc. You were exactly right. There are zero TV programs I watch, especially sports, without a commercial for a medication treating ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, which is inflammatory bowel disease.
IBD, yeah.
It's nuts. And so I believe it is absolutely environmental. I believe it. I've always said there's two keys to health: get the good in and get the bad out. So I believe we are overly toxic in our environment and in our mind. I want to put that in there because toxic thoughts are really killers as well. And I believe that there's more diagnoses today than there were, but I don't believe we're being overdiagnosed. In fact, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis tend to not be the first diagnosis. People will say, oh, he has pancreatitis, or he has, you name it. There's so many things that people will, or a parasite or IBS. So Crohn's and ulcerative colitis is a little bit of a complicated diagnosis, but I would guess, and this is not being made public, hopefully it will, I think since I was diagnosed, the incidence of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, collectively called inflammatory bowel disease, may have increased 1,000-fold.
I believe
along with other diseases like autism spectrum disorder and more. So it's nuts.
Yeah. So you didn't just get well, you got really well. Like you went through an identity shift where you became the sick kid, right? The sick guy. And then all of a sudden you became like the super fit guy. Like it wasn't a little bit of a change. When you see that, we'll call it the before picture that your mom took and the after picture when you were well, that's what's mind blowing is you go, that guy looked like that. And now he looks like this. So was there anything more beyond just eating differently?
Absolutely, Phil. And we touched on this on a previous short program we did. When I was in San Diego, I was undergoing this 40-day program. It ended up being more like 12 weeks all told, 80 days, so to speak. But because I was in a new environment and I was with unfamiliar people and unfamiliar surroundings, I made the decision with some prodding to really revisit my life, my memories, and focus on two things. Number one was forgiveness. I had to forgive people that had hurt me. I had to ask for forgiveness for people I had hurt. And then I really needed to change my attitude. And to your point, my identity. I had to stop focusing on the fact that I was sick because every 5 minutes I felt like I was getting stabbed in the gut. And I had to start realizing that those 4 minutes in between, maybe I wasn't as sick. And I started thanking God for the time that I wasn't feeling bad. And I do believe that coinciding with my diet and lifestyle extended those moments to hours and hours to days and days to weeks and weeks to months.